Great Aunt Hortensia is old money, Danny. If the seaside air and limey culture doesn't do it for you, think of the will. Nothing says best grandniece ever than flying halfway around the world to help the old coot sort through some old paintings, eh? That's the last thing Dad said to me before he slapped my back for good luck and sent me off on the red-eye from LAX to London Heathrow. The summer of this year. The worst summer of my life. Probably the last. As the locals would say, cheers, Dad. Prick. You can probably guess that I'm Danny. I'm in the UK and I'm not happy about it. Well, that's an understatement. Pissed is what I am. Or I would be if I wasn't so damn scared. Heathrow and what I got to see of London were glamorous and exciting, like the England you see in Hugh Grant movies. Great Aunt Hortensia doesn't live in London though. If she did, at least I'd have got to see some sights. No. To add insult to my no doubt impending injuries, Great Aunt Hortensia lives in Dovercourt. Heard of it? No? That's because nobody has. And now I'm going to die here. FML. So cliche, but Great Aunt Hortensia was also unheard of in our house until we got the letter. Uncle Pete and Aunt Tiff got one too, so we knew it had to be legit. We asked Gramps and he got that teary-eyed look before going off about some shindig back in the McCarthy days. Long story not short enough, after a few hours we found out I did indeed have a Great Aunt Hortensia. Gramps had only met her once. She was my great-great-aunt, technically, but nobody has that time for that many greats. Not to mention that old GG Aunt H doesn't deserve one great, let alone two. From what Gramps recalled, which wasn't much, she has two things. 1, British. 2, rich. If you guessed it was fact number 2, which meant my dad wrote straight back to volunteer his youngest daughter for a summer across the Atlantic, you'd be correct. I can't remember exactly what the letter said. Basically, she was writing to her beloved relatives as she needed some assistance in her twilight years. She had a sizable estate of collected artworks and oddities which she wanted help making arrangements for with collectors before my time on this mortal plane draws to a close and I bid you alas adieu. That last bit I remember very well. Such pretentious, much cringe. At the time, I thought it was because Great Aunt Hortensia must be an eccentric British millionaire. During the summer, I thought she spoke and wrote like that because she was insane. After this morning though, Jesus, maybe that's just what they think people speak like. Her quote-unquote mansion wasn't much to look at either, but it at least matched its owner. The exterior walls were an off yellow which may once have been vibrant, but after decades, cloud-grade UV rays and salt air had chipped and faded the paint on the wooden slates. The large building sagged in the middle, and it creaked and moaned on every breeze, no matter how slight. I gulped when I saw it. I was sure that the 3 stories with their single-pane painted shut Victorian window frames and ancient ceramic pipes on every interior wall would collapse under their own weight before the summer's end. Turned out, structural integrity was the least of my worries. I'm not currently biting my other hand so I don't let out any noise because of a badly maintained house. Got to set the scene though, right? Despite the dozens of staff that attended it, the mansion's interior was filthy. Dust and cobwebs had been left to take advantage of every available corner, crevice, and cranny. The floors at least were immaculate. Unlike everything else, they were well kept and scrubbed to immaculancy. It was the only activity I ever saw Great Aunt Hortensia's workforce occupy themselves with, now that I think about it. Aside from cook my 2 meals a day, porridge for breakfast and porridge with a satsuma on the side for dinner, I gave up complaining on day 3. The servants never answered and Bodges just got angry. You're wondering why I didn't complain to GAH, right? Well, that wasn't exactly an option. I didn't actually meet my great-great-aunt until this morning when Bodges, her housekeeper, told me I'd been summoned to the 3rd floor. I can hear her stomping around upstairs while I'm writing this, bellowing at Bodges and her army of servants to find that filthy parasite run if you don't want your eye jelly sucked out with a straw. I would have sympathy for her staff. Bodges may be a slumbering brute that smells like pickled eggs and it's decades overdue for a dental visit, but having your eyes drunk by whatever that thing is sounds painful. However, I did say would. It's hard to care when you're hiding in an antique closet because their boss wants to do much, much worse to you. If you think working for Great Aunt Hortensia is bad, Bodges, try being related to her. But that was this morning. We'll get to it, but not before I explain exactly why the whole time here in England has been a nightmare-inducing shit show. We've got a whole 8 weeks of summer to cover before I tell you why I'm having to keep one hand over my mouth to muffle whimpers. So anyway, the resentment set in roundabout the second the black cab dropped me off outside that seaside mansion. Instead of getting ready for my first semester at Brown, I would be sorting through portraits of long-dead distant relatives and gazing out the window at murky gray waves. Well, that's what I thought I'd be sorting through. I'll admit, I was actually quite happy at first when Bodges showed me around one of the ground floor gallery rooms on my arrival. Yes, you read that right. Rooms. Plural. The faded Easter chick yellow wooden mansion contained 8 in total before you even touched the staircase. It was more gallery than anything else. Aside from a kitchen dining space tucked in the back of the property, my lodgings in the basement and Great Aunt Hortensia's private wing in the attic, every square foot of floor space not in a bathroom was dedicated to displaying, well, I guess you could call it art. It was art in the way that raw footage of 9/11 could be classified as a documentary. All of GAH's quote-unquote public collections were quote-unquote normal, at least. More on that in a minute. But they were still disturbing. Hortensia was an avid collector of what they call outsider art. This is why the feelings my trepidation and eventual terror gave way to after a week were excitement and relief, rather than boredom and lethargy. There were no drab oil landscapes or aging portraits of long-dead British aristocracy. It was all dark and demented in a way my horror movie sensibilities found delectable. At first, I thought the rooms of schizophrenia-induced paintings and grotesque sculptures in the ground floor galleries were pretty cool. They were way more interesting than what I imagined. Some were pretty notorious too. I can see why the quote-unquote public collections cost about €2,000 entry. I think she even has some of John Wayne Gacy stuff down there, and a napkin doodle Charles Manson did in prison. People paid to see them, and until about the second week of summer, I felt kind of privileged to be able to study them at my leisure. Unfortunately, the endless chores Bodges had me doing soon wore off the intrigue. Even a Wayne Gacy painting stops feeling deliciously decadent by the 20th time you've polished and dusted the frame. I would have got in touch with Dad, asked him to pull me out, said fuck the damn will. Sorry, I didn't come here to be a slave for some woman who refused to even come down from the attic to meet me, I'd have said. Again, so cliché, but there was no damn Wi-Fi or cell signal in the mansion. If you're wondering why I didn't just leave, and you're wondering whether or not I was even allowed to, then 10 points to Gryffindor. I was isolated, trapped, and alone. I didn't have much time to worry about this, though, or entertain my growing worry that Great Aunt Hortensia was going to keep me here to join her army of thin, vacant-stared servants, the ones tearing through cupboards and looking around in crawl spaces looking for me right now. If only that was what she had planned. Sadly, though, I don't think the servants were ever human. Knows what they are. But they were once like you and I then. Well, my God, I don't want to know what a person goes through to become like that. At the time I got quote-unquote promoted to the second floor, though, I didn't have any reason to be suspicious of them. I just thought their quiet, dejected demeanor was down to overworking. Now I'm in the cupboard, though. Now I can hear them scuttling over the walls and ceilings outside. I'm starting to think the reason they never stopped working had nothing to do with toxic labor conditions. Still, I think whatever Great Aunt Hortensia has planned for me is much worse. I don't think Bodges would ever have looked so apologetic when he grabbed me otherwise. I was moved to upstairs duties, as Bodges called it, on the Monday of my 4th week in Dovercourt. This is when things went from weird but boring to weird but terrifying. It's also the week I found out I wasn't allowed to either leave or talk to the patrons. The bruises from being Bodge's tackled when I tried the former faded weeks ago. The scars on my back start burning if I think about my one attempt at the latter too long. I knew better than to try to ask the patrons for help after that. They clearly didn't care. Otherwise, they'd have stopped Bodge's going to town with his flail of rope and broken glass. I still can't help but wonder, was that a gallery installation he repurposed, or did he create the disciplinary weapon himself? Either way, seeing the guests fork over money for the privilege of seeing me bleeding and crying on the floor eroded what faith I ever had in humanity, especially when they started asking to pay to help him stitch up the wounds with fishing wire. That particular perversion only took their interest after Bodge's hand-fisted medical attention had me conscious and screaming again. Fuckers. Not sorry. The well-to-do visitors of the ground floor galleries paid handsomely to visit. They were the kind of folk you're probably imagining. Slimy, off-putting, a little mouth-breathy, and excessively wealthy. Like the worst parts of an anime convention gave up Japan for Downtown Abbey. The visitors to the members-only second-floor gallery were something else, though. Wrong in ways there are probably only words for in German. These were the collectors Great Aunt Hortensia had written to us about. Both they and the quote-unquote art they come to view/buy/sell were almost as unsettling as she was when I first laid eyes on her this morning. They went from unsettling to horrifying almost as quickly, too. The second floor contained only 2 rooms aside from the landing. Apart from the small second-floor gallery, the floor was cut off from access all but except Bodge's. I never saw what was on the rest of the floor, but my guess is storage. The only reason I haven't gone poking around to investigate, other than the memories of Bodge's glass shard whip, is that I've seen the things he brings in and out of that room. The small glimpse I've had of what must be stored on that damn floor was enough. The second floor patrons would wait on one of the 2 comfy chairs in front of the fireplace in the quote-unquote gallery. I'd say quote-unquote there because I rarely saw anything displayed there, only ever what the visiting patron was interested in buying, if they weren't there to sell. They'd appraise the object or painting for about half an hour while I waited by the small bar to serve drinks if they asked. Then Bodge's would return, and he'd discuss business with the visitor. I didn't pour a single drink the entire time I was there. None of the weirdos and freaks that rolled through asked or even seemed to acknowledge I was there. I'm going to be honest, I think the only reason I got put on second floor duty is that that's where Bodge's spent the majority of his time. I think it was less about Bodge's needing help and more about orders from the attic to keep a closer eye on me. As I said, they were wrong. Not the sleazy kind of wrong of the first floor patrons. The collectors and dealers Bodge's liaised with on Great Aunt Hortensia's behalf were, well, they're the same kind of people as Great Aunt Hortensia, nightmares masquerading as humans. There was a man in a 1950s-style private eye trench coat, except no gumshoe in a movie I ever saw looked as tired and sleep-deprived as he did. None of the movie detectives had ears that leaked blood despite the rags stuffed in them, or had perfect half-inch scars over every inch of visible skin. At least the item that particular visitor purchased from Bodge's wasn't distressing. It was just a beaten-up, clearly used Bluetooth speaker. Weird. Definitely not worth the 20 grand bleeding ear detective dropped on it. But I'll level. I didn't care. Paying more than I've ever seen in my life for a second-hand speaker is the least weird transaction I saw this summer. One time, I got to the second floor to see a series of paintings depicting what I'm guessing were ritual sacrifices. I thought they were photos at first. They were so vivid I broke down into floods of tears and Bodge's had to slap me twice before I managed to compose myself. One in particular, a large oil painting of some rabid pilgrim types dancing around a kid tied to a flaming witch-burning pyre, burned itself into the back of my eyes for a week. I never saw any cash change hands for this collection. The collection was wrapped up and stuffed in a van by a few guys with New York accents. One disappeared into the bathroom and came back minus a hand, but with plenty of new tears. I still feel like puking a little when I picture how happy Bodge's looked upon receiving that dripping paper bag. There was a bug-eyed tweaker-looking couple, again American, from Florida I'm guessing, who stank of homelessness and hard drug abuse. They exchanged a jar of blue sand for an ugly, dark purple candle that reeked of rotten meat, placed tenderly in Bodge's hands by the filthy woman of the pair. A man Bodges addressed simply as Mayor Jeffries paid for a box of old VHS tapes with several property deeds and worryingly asked Bodges to thank Great Aunt Hortensia for her business again. A bunch of government spook-looking guys gave over a briefcase of syringes full of yellow ooze, swapping them for a little red book. One of the G-men, well, G-women technically, gave it a brief flick through, despite the thin-faced head of their group warning her not to. I'd already scrubbed my own blood out of those floorboards thanks to Bodges, so cleaning up hers didn't traumatize me as much as you think. Seeing a grown woman gouge her own eyes out with a ballpoint pen, however, will have me in therapy for decades. Well, it would have done if I'd managed to make it out. Guess it's not something I've got to worry about now, right? Silver linings and all that. The most disturbing was when a man whose face I physically can't remember showed up with an envelope he claimed contained the coordinates of where they're keeping her damn god. Bodges nearly fainted when he heard this. He offered the swirling-faced stranger a large crate in exchange, a box so big he had to rope in 4 of the voiceless servants to carry it. I couldn't stop myself from sobbing when I heard the bangs and cries for help coming from inside. They sounded far too young for me to keep myself composed. If you're wondering whether that got me another session with Bodge's favorite glass toy, congratulations, 10 more points to Gryffindor. But yeah, this was week 4 until yesterday morning. As you can imagine, I was pretty broken by the time Bodges knocked on my door this morning to tell me I'd been summoned to the attic. I didn't really process what he'd said at first. The attic? Bodges rolled his bloodshot eyes at me and I flinched out of Pavlovian reflex. Yes, girl, the attic. Mistress Hortensia feels it's time to meet you in person. To, thank you for your hard work this summer before you returned to the colonies. When Bodges said this, it was the first time I ever saw him look at me with anything other than annoyance, disgust, or hatred. This was the first time he looked genuinely apologetic about my situation. It terrified me. I had a lump in my throat all through breakfast. Porridge, like every morning. For every minute of my cold shower, I was sobbing uncontrollably. I knew that whatever waited for me upstairs, it was worse than anything I'd seen so far, and I'd already seen far too much. The journey up the second flight of stairs was filled with internal debates about whether I could tackle Bodges. The seconds he spent unlocking the door were on whether taking another glass shard lashing was worth buying me an extra few minutes. I've always been indecisive though, and that's why I heard the door clicking behind me before I registered that Bodges had pushed me through the dark room on the other side. It was quiet in the gloom beyond. Even the distant rush of the gray Dovercourt waves was muted the moment Bodges shut me in the darkness. The only sensations in my ear were the ringing of near silence, the faint thumping of my heart against my ribcage, and the long, low creaks of my weight on the floorboards as I crept. Unlike the other 2 stories, the floors in the attic were as dusty and neglected as the walls and ceilings. Ah, is that the runt? I heard the deep, ragged breaths when I was about halfway down the hallway. There were only 2 doors. The one Bodges had shut behind me, and the one the gravelly words had drifted from on the other end. My legs felt like they were going to buckle. My breaths came through so shallow my head felt light. Despite fear levels so high, unconsciousness started looming. I found my shaking hands turning the doorknob. I didn't have any other choice, did I? The breathing got louder as I turned, both my shallow quivering pants and the booming wheezes beyond the red wooden door. Great Aunt Hortensia? My stammer was met with a hacking laugh from the rotund figure sat in the shadows across the room from the doorway. She was too entrenched in the dark to make out anything beyond her silhouette. All I could tell at that point was that she was big in a way that usually requires medical intervention. Ha! Ha! Runt, you still think? Amazing the way you parasites cling to the lies as always. Ha! Quote-unquote Great Aunt Hortensia let forth another rattling chuckle. I stood in the doorway, frozen in place. Every hair on my body was on end. I knew instantly that I wasn't just dealing with an insane, grotesquely obese aristocrat. On an instinctual level, I understood even then that something was wrong here. Wrong in a way that folk can drive themselves into a nut house trying to understand. Great Aunt Hortensia, I want... I could hear myself blubbering, pleading even though the voice behind my eyes knew it was useless. I want to go home. Please. I could feel the warmth of tears on my face. They only grew heavier when the thing across the room started chuckling again. Home? The runt wants to go home. Ha! Ha! There was a sound in the dark, like tongues smacking against unseen lips. This was accompanied by creaks and groans of leather and wood as Great Aunt Hortensia adjusted her position, leaning forward. Well, we all want to go home, runt. I'll be able to soon. But that's not something such a pathetic vermin could understand. Great Aunt... There was a new sound in the dark then, somewhere between a snarl and a spit that had me doing a few involuntary Kegel exercises. Quiet your scum tongue, runt. It's been bad enough, listening to you skulking and whimpering these weeks. No matter. The shell will be worth it. There was a third sound in the dark, and as soon as it bounced through the blackness, I screamed so loudly dust fell from the distant rafters. The sound was a single click, the single click of a bedside lamp being turned on. A bedside lamp whose light gave me my first sanity-shattering view of Great Aunt Hortensia. She had no eyes. Her features were pressed and stretched across her bulbous head. Both the empty sockets and the nostrils on her flattened nose revealed writhing, slug-like flesh underneath. The obviously not human anatomy was also visible at multiple splits. Tears and lacerations that lined her bulging skin. The skin itself was gray-rotten. Maggots wriggled in and out of its waxy surface, and occasionally there'd be a sharp crack as one of the many flies buzzing around her got distracted and made a kamikaze run for the lamp on the rickety table beside her. Its chair. My nostrils caught up eventually. If I wasn't so busy screaming, I would have barfed. The sickly sweet aroma of decaying meat was overpowering. It sloshed around my lungs, pulling me further into nausea with every inter-scream inhale. Don't have strength to empty you, but we have the serum. Now, it's time for us to act. I screamed even louder when those sagging lips peeled back to reveal the writhing cement-colored gums underneath. The teeth set into them were the worst part, though. I always thought Brits had bad teeth. Great Aunt Hortensia didn't. Hers were perfect. I don't mean perfect like they were healthy and human. I meant they were perfect like a goddamn fucking sorry cartoon. They were each an exact square. Only on razor blades had I seen edges and corners as straight as on that dentistry. Detergent companies wish they can get whites as white as those teeth too. They were dazzling, and not in an attractive way, in a way that helped my stomach leap the final few steps into nausea land. Don't ask me how, but I knew those teeth were the reason it didn't need the eyes of whoever's skin it was wearing. They were looking at me. It saw with them. I know this because I could feel the disgust emanating from them when I projectile vomited on the dusty floor. Ah, parasites. Disgusting. Enough, runt. Give me your skin. I didn't stop to ask what she meant. I was already halfway back down the hallway by the time those teeth had parted. Though, for some stupid fucking so-not-sorry reason, I looked back over my shoulder before I tumbled through the door Bodges was walking through. The cement gums had pushed outwards beyond the rotting lips. From their bulging, a new split had formed, one that ran vertically down the center of GAH's face skin. Maggots too slow to avoid the schism tumbled and plummeted off the razor-sharp teeth as her inner jaw began to protrude. I had just enough time to catch sight of the 3 glistening, thick green tongues protruding a full 6 feet from her dissonant gullet before I felt my shoulder slam to Bodge's chest. We tumbled down the stairs together. I somehow managed to avoid the syringe in his hand, but he didn't avoid my boot to his face. I'd love to say that was an awesome, heroic moment, but the truth is I was in full-on blind panic mode. I didn't register it was Bodge's or that he was holding a syringe full of the yellow stuff the G-Man had deposited. All I knew was I had to run. If running didn't work, kick, punch, and yell until it did again. The servants weren't scrubbing the floor anymore. Do you remember when I said I don't think they were ever human? Well, this is when they decided to show it. When I flew around the corner into the second floor landing, I saw them waiting for me at the foot of the stairs. They were all staring up at me, a dozen or so of them with lips stretched tight against their mouths, every pair of dead eyes locked onto my tearful ones. I started running as soon as they made the noise. They started in unison, not a human sound. It was mechanical, almost like one of those nuclear attack sirens played in reverse at half speed. The noise itself wasn't why I ran to the only door I could see, though. It was because when they made it, they jumped into the walls and started scrambling up them towards me. Oh, and for those who have been paying attention to the layout of Great Aunt Hortensia's mansion, yes, the only other door was the second floor gallery. That's how I found myself in this antique wooden cabinet in the storage room. I wasn't lying earlier when I said I'd not gone poking around here. I've only run through it, sobbing and screaming. I can hear things, though. Things chittering and chattering in the dark space outside the wood. Things that sound like they might be even worse than whatever's pretending to be Great Aunt Hortensia. Things that rattle the bars to their cages. Things that are screaming horrifying things about me into the dark. Things that somehow know my name. I can hear Bodge's opening the door to the storage room now, so I've got to wrap this up. I don't think I'm getting out of this. Well, no duh, but I didn't want you to think this had a happy ending. I've still got no signal. That's why I've written this on the Notes app. If you found this cell phone, please find my family's contact details in it. Let them know what happened. Show them this. Let my dad know he's a greedy, selfish prick, and his greedy, selfish prick ways got his daughter killed. Oh, and please post this online somewhere too, in case anyone else is experiencing something similar. Who knows, they may find it helpful. Unless, that is, you found this outside of a sagging yellow wooden mansion in Dovercourt. If you did, don't bother with any of that. Just run. Final request, and this one is most important. If you contact my family and they tell you I'm not dead, send them this anyway. Tell them to get away as fast as they can. If I dropped my cell phone, there is no way I made it out of this shithole alive. So not sorry. All of you, if you ever meet Danielle Casterwood, 19 from LA, remember, it's not me.